Is Nigel Farage a Nazi because of remarks and edgy jokes that he supposedly made when he was in his teenage years? Is the Welsh Government getting into bed with blatant race Marxists to fuel their agendas at the expense of Wales and the Welsh people? Are we being too lenient with the left, and really what can we do? How can we change our attitudes to make sure in many instances we simply stay alive? All that and more today, ladies and gentlemen, on Voice of the Valleys. Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Voice of the Valleys yet again with your host, friendly neighbourhood, far-right thug, satirical, unless he's not, Mr. George Cresswell. Hope we're all doing well. Hope we're all having a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever we are. Boy, I've been out of the game for a little while, haven't I? Now, if you're seeing this, it means that at least for the present moment, technical difficulties which I've been dealing with the last sort of couple of days, this entire week really, have at least somewhat been dealt with. Let's give you a little bit of an insight, ladies and gentlemen. I'll give you a little insight into sort of how this whole thing really works, right? There's a process which all of these go through, right? In order to, the thing that you see on YouTube or Rumble, Spotify, whatever it is the last step in a quite long, laborious process, involving many different steps, from recording to cleaning it up to editing to all of this other stuff. However, we've been having a lot of technical difficulties, particularly on the laptop side of things at the moment, which I'm trying to showcase. This episode would have probably been out a few days ago, and it's quite a lot of this stuff is kind of out of date at the moment, but still nonetheless important to talk about. You know, literally, it seems at the moment, and I will say that, as I said in that episode, I'm trying to improve every single episode as I go along. That might mean that I might not comment on things straight away. I don't really care so much at this present moment in time about being first. I care about being right. I care about trying to get to the truth of things, right? That's why I like having conversations with people, obviously. This episode, as I said, would have been out a couple of days ago, but it's been stuck on a screen that looks like this, right? So as part of the process that these kind of things go through, I end up uploading the file to Riverside. Riverside is a service that I also use to do the virtual conversations and interviews and stuff like that. And it also allows me then to set the chapters really easily, to use the AI tools to clean up the audio, which is really, really helpful a lot of the time. It transcribes it. It does a lot of good things, and I obviously use it then to do the conversations and stuff like that as well. But something's been going on with it at the moment, and one thing, look, I'll bring this up on screen for you to see now. This would have been, and also another big thing was when I was on a really slow internet connection. It also massively decreases the file size. So whereas this file size, depending on how long this episode is now, I would imagine it's going to be fairly long, could be anywhere from like 13 to 20 gigabytes, depending on how, thing it is. I could not upload that over my previous Wi-Fi. It would not only take way too long, a lot of times it would just outright fail, right? Not the case anymore, thankfully. But it also then massively reduces the file size in the finished product down to only a couple of gigabytes, maybe even only a couple of 100 megabytes or whatever. And that's really, really helpful. That's really, really helpful. It's another reason why I like using it as well. So that's what I usually do. And then once it's exported, that's what then goes out to YouTube, and that's what you guys end up seeing. It also makes it really easy to mute all of the words that YouTube doesn't want you to say and all of those things, which I wouldn't be able to really do otherwise, because I don't have somebody in a control room editing this in real time. But you'll see here, ladies and gentlemen, one of the problems I have been having with it is that this episode, which I think it's number 74 we're on at the moment, which would have been out a few days ago. And again, kind of a blessing in disguise, really, because it wasn't my best work. Has been stuck in this phase for about 3 days, fully uploaded, processing, but it's stuck in this 99% glitch. And a lot of other glitches have been happening at the moment as well. So I'm hoping, Riverside is a pretty good service, to be fair, that I hope it, irons itself out. In addition to a couple of other things that seem to be going on at the moment. You try to get rid of or rename chapters, and then it doesn't quite work. You've got to do it a different way. And it's just, there's little things that are making it a little bit inconvenient to use at the moment. But that's some of the things that we've been dealing with, not to mention just other technical difficulties on my laptop and stuff like that, which is why the one that went out, I believe it was a day or two ago, 2 days ago, I believe it was recorded on my phone. It was recorded down on one of the sofas in my living room in front of my total Christmas tree. And yeah, that's where we are at the moment. I'm trying to keep an upload schedule as best I can. But if you're seeing this, it means that at least somewhat it worked. And I'm hoping it's going to be out later on today, the Saturday, the 22nd of November, 2025. Thank you to everybody who has been with me. Also, please share the channel and please go and follow me on Rumble. Obviously, we are 3 subscribers, I believe, away from, if I just double check, 1,600 subscribers on YouTube. And yeah, it just had another, I think we've hit a small milestone of about 130 on Rumble. So again, on Rumble, you'll have all of the completely pretty much uncensored stuff. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss out on anything like that, then please go over and watch it on Rumble. Obviously, a lot of words and stuff can sometimes be censored on YouTube. So yeah, make sure you go and watch it on Rumble if you want to make sure you get everything completely uncensored. Yeah, we're actually 2 away. We're actually 2 away at this moment in time from 1,600. So please go over and share the channel, see if we can get to 1,600, hopefully, very, very soon. And obviously share on Rumble, follow me on all the other platforms as well. Getting straight into today, I posted an update as a short on YouTube. We have some more information, or at least the most up-to-date information as far as I am aware, involving the murder of Lainie Williams and the attempted murder of her mother, Rhian, who, good news with regards to Rhian, as I pointed out in that short. Thank God she's at home now, recovering at home. So she's been deemed well enough to go home from the hospital, and she actually released a statement. It's in the Express. You can go and find it down below. She asked parents to please keep an eye on changes affecting their children, saying, quote, "I'd never want another mum to experience this kind of pain." And paid a tribute to the tragic murder of 17-year-old Lainie Williams. So obviously, Lainie Williams, the alleged murderer at this point, I will continue to say alleged. Everybody is innocent until proven guilty. And you have Cameron Cheng, the 18-year-old that is, I believe, still remanded in prison at this point in time, awaiting trial, which the earliest I think we're looking at a trial for this is likely going to be May next year. So it's just based on a quick query I did with Grok. So he appeared in court in Newport Magistrates, November 17th. This is the stuff that I said in the short as well. Another thing which said in the short, it does appear that at this point that this is maybe a relationship that went south or something like that, because they were in a relationship. Lainie and Cameron were in a relationship at some point, confirmed by screenshots on Facebook. And it does appear that Cameron was being raised by a mother or maternal figure, and I'm not sure whether it's his mother himself, right, or if it's an adoption. I'm not sure, because all the surnames are different, right? It was Stephania. Let me just double check if it was Stephania Evans. I can't remember if it was Stephania Evans or I think it was Evans. I'll link the short down below, and you can see the screenshots that I posted. No information, at least, to be found about any kind of father or whatever, but presumably that's going to be where Cameron gets his Chinese heritage from, or his Asian heritage from. 17th, he appeared in Newport Magistrates Court to give his name, date of birth, and address. It was immediately upgraded to the Crown Court. He appeared there the next day via video link from prison. Again, only to give his name and date of birth, and Judge Tracy Lloyd Clark scheduled a provisional trial date for May the 11th, 2026, with an estimated duration of 2 to 3 weeks. No plea has been entered at this stage, and he remains in custody. A plea and trial preparation hearing is expected later, but no specific date for that has been publicly detailed yet. That's as far as I am aware at the moment. I will do a quick check to see if there has been any updates on trial dates. I'm just typing it in as I speak. If there's any trial dates or What else can we say? What else can we say? Or proceedings. We'll just call them proceedings. So I'll just let that play in the background a moment, ladies and gentlemen. We'll just get Grok to do a sources check. But that's where we are at the moment. And as I said, horrible, horrible. You know, there's no words to describe how horrible this is. But yeah, this is... I don't even really know what to say at this point, because the question is obviously going to be there now, especially with a lot of topics that we see and we talk about on this show. Is this going to be the start of the problems that we've seen elsewhere in other areas of the country? We've got more examples to go through as well, some which people have reached out to me specifically to send me, which I greatly appreciate, of where now these issues that we're seeing are affecting just quiet rural hamlet areas, hamlets, townships, whatever you want to say. But there have been no additional court appearances or proceedings for Cameron Cheng since his preliminary hearing at Cardiff Crown Court November 18th. Updates from recent reports confirm that the case has been adjourned for a plea and trial preparation hearing for December 12th, 2025, where he is expected to enter pleas to the charges. The provisional trial date remains May 11th, 2026, with an estimated duration of 2 to 3 weeks, and he has been he's continued to be remanded in custody. So we will see, ladies and gentlemen. December 12th is not very far away. It's only a matter of, two to 3 weeks. So we will see if we have any more information at that point, but he will be expected to enter a plea to the charges on December the 12th, 2025. So we will have more information to report on them. But if you are so inclined, please keep Rian in your prayers, and obviously please keep the soul of Lainie in your prayers as well, ladies and gentlemen, if you are so inclined. And let's just hope, seriously hope, that justice will be done. That brings me on to something I think is really important to talk about, ladies and gentlemen. Concept of justice, concept of, truth winning out, of good being done, an objective good, right, which is pretty much the central linchpin of justice, right? We feel a sense of injustice when the truth has not been, or basically I suppose the truth has not been legislated on, as if things haven't been resolved in a morally good manner, in accordance with an objective standard. Right, that would be the concept of justice. We have an injustice when, any number of the horrific crimes happen to young girls in this country, right, as a result of the rape act, and it was a severe injustice when, rather than those people either being sent to prison or executed, whatever it may be, right, that they were given super lenient punishments. In many instances, then the girls themselves were criminalized, families were criminalized, all because it would have been deemed racist or intolerant or all of these things. It's one of the biggest cries of injustice that's been seen this century, and even the last century as well, right? Because these things are still going on, and they've been going on for the better part of a century now, since, the midway through the 20th century up until present day, right? But these themes of, not having justice be done because of allegations of racism or allegations of intolerance, all of these things, right, no matter what they are seemingly baked into the justice system of our nations. And that's why we're going about the whole justice system being woke and all of these things, right? But they openly say it. Politicians say it openly if you know what to look for. But if you don't know what to look for, if you have been taken in by the propaganda, taken in by the wordplay and all of these things, because the leftists at the heart of these movements, right, and the people behind all of these movements, they have played an extremely good game with the game that they have been playing. Think about the names of the acts that have been introduced in Britain, right? The Equality Act. Are you going to be against equality? It's just a name that's been chosen to smuggle in all other kinds of meanings, all other kind of nonsense. In many instances, anti-British nonsense, right? And many instances, other kinds of racism, namely anti-white racism. But if you say that the Equality Act needs to be repealed, you're against equality, you're against all of these things. How evil and bigoted you are. It's just the names of these things have been chosen so, blatantly politicized, but they've been chosen with a specific reason, because instantly it puts people against these ideas on the back foot. It's like a rhetorical sucker punch. A lot of the names of these things are, you're squaring off with somebody, you're about to have this thing, but like they're extending the gloves, right? They're extending the gloves in the middle of the octagon, to give a high five or whatever, and then they pull their hand back and they launch a big overhand right over the top or whatever. When you see that in the UFC, if you're going to do that, a lot of people say, I don't like doing the whole hand touch thing or whatever. That's fair enough. But if someone's going to come out and do it, right, and instigate that gesture, and then when the opponent reciprocates, being like, oh, okay, we're going to have this, it's a sign of respect, saying like, okay, we're going to do what we're going to do now. We're going to abide by the rules and such. But then that person, after instigating it, pulls back and uses it to try and get some advantage. It's not necessarily against the rules, right? But it's unsporting. It's unsportsmanlike, right? And it shows a level of, I don't know whether you want to call it duplicitousness, I guess, lying, essentially. And again, it's not necessarily against the rules, but it's designed deliberately to put that person on the back foot, and it's unsporting. That's why they use Equality Act. That's why they use terms like anti-racism, which means, which in many instances now is just race Marxism, and it's against cultural whiteness, with race being one thing, but now it's the linchpin for restorative justice, whereby recently you've seen in Chicago, there was a black man with 72 prior arrests that just burnt a woman to death by setting her on fire on the subway. Right? He had 72 prior arrests. But if he was to be sent to prison, it would have been deemed as racist, because based on skin color, you can only have some people are inherent oppressed, some people are inherent oppressors. Right? It's the same system that led to the murder of Irina Zarutska. It's the same system that the activists are relying on to try and get Austin Metcalf's killer off the hook. Right? All of these different things, but the Welsh government showing that they want to cow down to these activists. They want to embrace this system, right? Which in many instances now is just anti-white racism. That's what it is. It's just anti-white racism. So Mark Drakeford was on the floor of the Senedd going on and bemoaning that on population scales, so many more black people are in prison versus white people, and implying, which if you have a look at the organization he references as who he has support for and who he's seemingly taken his guidance from, seemingly the Race Council of Cymru, which we'll go over those in a moment. They're blatant race Marxists and liars. We'll go over those in a moment. He calls the disparity shocking, which, yes, it is. Yes, it is. But not for the reasons that they want to put forth. Right? And he said it would be addressed by robust elements of the race equality plan. Now, I've got some things to go over with regards to this, ladies and gentlemen, but here is that clip of Mark Drakeford on the Senedd floor going on about this. But then we're going to go over some stats. We're going to go over some other things with regards to explaining how dangerous this actually is, and really how anti-Welsh it actually is.
Are imprisoned for every 100,000 people in the population. 91 black people are imprisoned. And that is a shocking analysis. It's why in the cooperation between our two parties, we have a specific commitment to ensure that the justice elements of the Race Equality Action Plan are robust and address these matters with the police and the courts. And that is the way in which we intend to take forward the practical ways in which we can address the figures that we've discussed this afternoon. The long-term.
Right, and then he goes on to say the long-term answer is to devolve policing and stuff like that, which I don't think many people would get behind at the moment. We've seen how inept our... Well, I don't know. Maybe leave it down below. Would you be in favour of devolving policing with the current Welsh government that we have and the next one that's likely to come in, which is likely to be some sort of Plaid Labour coalition with Plaid at the head of it this time, instead of being, the ones working with Labour in the background, right? I'm not exactly very hot on it. But then again, policing as a whole seems to be, an absolute shambles at this moment in time, with the same ideological rot that's perforated through all of our public institutions. So the race equality plan, so it's been signed off with and taken heavy, input from charities, quote unquote charities, like the Race Council Cymru. which if you have a look on their website is full of all of the standard lefty stuff on race, right? Working together to promote race equality, integration and justice in Wales is what they say, right? Race Council Cymru facilitates and manages events, projects and activities to support its strategic mission. So that's a big admission right there. But again, they try to cover up what they're actually doing with all of this colourful language, which we'll go over in a moment. Charity works with diverse ethnic minority groups and individuals across Wales to deliver the projects listed below. So it uses youth projects, it uses cultural and digital hubs, all of this stuff. They're all multicultural, which I'm completely against anyway. I'm a monoculturalist, if you will. So far, RCC's work encompasses many successes, including Black History Month, Windrush, Crossing Borders, and much more. So they have all of this stuff dedicated to the Windrush generation, right? Talking about different stories and all of these other things. One guy, which they said on there, which is quite interesting, he had a couple of different flags behind him, which I'm not exactly sure. One of them seems to be the Ghanaian flag. And literally the quote they use here, everyone is saying England is paved with gold and all that sort of nonsense, right? So it just seems that they've chosen some people who don't exactly have, the greatest outlook on the nations of Great Britain, right? Many instances now, people are outright using that leverage, that emotional leverage, right? The victimhood leverage against a disarmed population, both physically and intellectually, right? To see through this stuff. But they make it clear. They make it clear with the kind of stuff that they put out, right? So they're saying 5 years on, honouring George Floyd and the movement for racial justice. And this is where, again, racial justice. Just replace racial with any other kind of justice that you've seen communists use throughout history, like the Cambodian Khmer Rouge being focused on social justice and all of these things. And you see instantly via this intersectionality framework, which they use to link all of these together, that it's just Marxism at its core. It's Marxism at its core. It's like the hat which they put the idea into, and out comes this thing. So they put racism into the Marxism hat, you end up with racial justice. They put classism into it, and they end up with the inherent class struggle of communism, right? Any other social factor, that's where the trans stuff can come in. That's where feminism comes in. It's where all of these other things are designed to divide people along all of these lines, right? And be able to pit all of the different people in a society against each other, so they forget who's actually pulling the strings, namely the government, and namely then who they are beholden to. 5 years on, honouring George Floyd and the movement for racial justice. Now, I was sadly taken in by this back in 2020, right, via social pressure. I remember feeling the social pressure at that time, seeing no end of people going out to buy books about like Robin DiAngelo and all of this stuff, the grifters, etc. I was taken in by it. I wasn't one of these people that were, flagellating to a massive extent, but I didn't have the tools to see through it. And obviously then you had the censorship apparatus. You had all of the things. This is where Antifa then came out of, Black Lives Matter and all of these other movements that were running riot quite literally, and the propaganda machine was in full swing. You didn't see any of the other footage which we're going to be going through in a moment, and we were sold this lie. We were sold this absolute lie, and groups like this want to keep it going. Groups like this want to keep it going. And then they say it with the initiatives they want to put through. So it says, we at Race Council Cymru join communities across the world in marking 5 years since the murder of George Floyd. There's the first lie. At least in my opinion, anyway. He wasn't murdered. He wasn't murdered. At least not by Derek Chauvin, which is obviously what they want to insinuate. His death on 25th of May 2020, beneath the knee of a police officer, was not just a tragedy, it was a turning point. It was a tragedy. It was a tragedy. Absolutely. It was a tragedy, all of the different situations that he got into. It was a tragedy, all of the things he put all of his other victims through. Right? It's a tragedy what Derek Chauvin has been put through. The fact that he didn't get anything resembling a fair trial. The fact that he knew when going into that trial that it was already a done deal because there was a bunch of purple-haired rioters outside that were going to burn the courthouse and everything down if they didn't get the result that they wanted. Right? It sparked a global cry for justice that rang out in every corner of the world. From Minneapolis to Merthyr, people took to streets, screens to classrooms, and to their hearts to say, enough is enough. Yeah, the lie that made its way round the world very much so quicker than the truth could finish up lacing up its boots. But so many lies that we were told. But they wanna keep this going. They want to keep this going, right? So we're going to be going over all of the George Floyd stuff in a moment, ladies and gentlemen, going over some of the things that were available at the time, but due to censorship, due to demonetization, due to deplatforming, all of these things, we weren't allowed to see it. Many things that myself included were duped into thinking at the time, right? But thinking about the things that they want to do, the anti-racist action plan, one of the things which they, and I'll link this down below as well, where you can go see it. It's on the Welsh Government's website. Right, I'll link the link. I won't link the actual document, but I'll link the part of the website where you can go and download the document, because I don't think it really works that well. If I try to put the actual document in the links, it probably won't work, right? But it'll take you to the web page where you can find it. And they say governance structure of the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan, which started to be introduced in 2020, there's 4 key components: external accountability group, internal support and challenge group, policy-specific EAG, so that's external accountability group subgroups. So hang on, we need the external accountability group, and then we need groups within that group. Kind of weird. And then engagement with ethnic minority people to capture their lived experiences via regional forums. Everything obviously being lived experience. But the biggest thing is why you're saying that this is institutionally racist in and of itself, ladies and gentlemen. They claim to want to address, as they say, systemic discrimination, right? Saying we want to promote equality and challenge systemic discrimination. They openly do it by saying that they're not going to listen to certain sects of people if they want to get in the government's way based on their race. Based on their race. We covered that last time. I'll play the clip again for you in a moment of Heleth Fiken saying that exact thing. But they openly lie and say that a culture of anti-racism benefits everyone. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, because you have some people who are inherently oppressed and you have some people who are inherent oppressors by virtue of their skin color, right? And as a result, you treat people differently based on that, right? This is why it's not anti-racism, ladies and gentlemen. It's reverse racism. That's the thing. That's the thing. And they openly say, our politicians openly say, as I'll play the clip for you now, we are not going to listen to the voice. We're not always going to be listening to the voice of the majority if they're all white voices. Let me play this for you. This is literally Plaid Cymru representative in this instance saying that in order to implement and achieve an anti-racist Wales, you have to ignore certain people who are in the majority based on their skin colour.
We're not always going to be listening to the voice of the majority if they are all white voices. If we are serious about being an anti-racist Wales, and we seriously want to see that happen, there will be disagreement, and we're not always going to be listening to the voice of the majority if they are all white voices. And certainly in terms of seeing responses such as this, I think one of the very important things in terms of the consultation is that we see who responds.
See, they literally say it.
If there is opposition, from what viewpoint is that opposition coming? It was just a painting on the wall for me, but when Black Lives Matter emerged as a campaign, I then came to understand, because of my privilege as a white person, that I wasn't aware of the history, the problematic history of that portrait.
Yeah, a problematic history of being a white person. Well, the problematic history of being the first civilization on moral grounds of a certain religion, which is now being deemed as oppressive in and of itself, to abolish the institution of racial slavery. You go to many of these other countries, the Middle East, right? Africa, where they're literally still enslaving themselves to this day, where this stuff is still going on as if it's freaking as normal as anything else, right? It's something as normal as us going to the Tesco and buying a frigging little bit of meat or whatever, which is increasingly getting more and more common because they're trying to drive up the prices to make it, less feasible for people to be able to buy them, and doing so deliberately, not to mention all of the other things, right? Because they want us to eat the bugs and own nothing, and we will be happy, yeah? And you have the... Slavery is as normal in many areas of the world as that is for us, right? It's unique with us. It's unique with white Western Europeans in particular. And we said, this is actually wrong. This is actually wrong in an objective sense, and we are going to get rid of it. We're actually going to get rid of it. That's a problematic history. Is it, Heleth? That's a problematic history. And if we're going to be playing the whole historical grievances game, where we have a lot more historical grievances with our young girls at the hands of many people who are in this country that shouldn't be in this country, not just Wales now, but UK as a whole, who shouldn't have been here, that never ever shouldn't have been allowed to be here. And we're going to play the historical injustice game, are we? Well, we only have to go back to, the 50s or even just slightly later than that, right? The grievances against the British people, right, for racial and religious reasons. A lot more fresh in the memory. Still going on today, actually. And you guys don't want to do anything about it. No, you're too busy addressing the opposite and fueling more of this stuff because you plan to ignore white people. You plan to be racist against white people. And that's showing that you are going to be going against the wishes of Welsh people, because Welsh people, their ancestry, are white people. Welsh people, in terms of who someone is at their, who they are down to their very constituent parts, right? Not everybody can be Welsh for the same reason, and that's English, and that's Scottish, and all of these other places, right? For the same reason that not everybody can be Algerian, that not everybody can be Pakistani, that not everybody can be Russian, that not everybody can be whatever country you want to put it from, African and all the other places, right? Dutch. Just rattle off all the things. Rattle off all the different countries you want. The great lie is that anybody can be anything. And obviously then that's a lie that pervades down to the fact that men can be women, women can be men, all of this stuff, right? People are what they are. The government's showing here that they have plans to ignore their people. They have plans to ignore their people, even if they're in the majority, as the UK has been doing for generations now, which we'll go over when we look at polling data with regards to Windrush in particular. The government is now an authority accountable to no one other than itself. And that's how they see it anyway. And that's why they bend over backwards to do things for everybody except their own people. Because they hate their own people. If you're a Welsh person, if you're an English person, if you're a Scottish person, if you're an Irish person, they hate you. They hate you, and in many instances they want you dead. Or they want you whipped into subservience, and they want your replacement normalized and cheered on by you. They want your genocide by replacement to be cheered on by you. They want the lie to be so entrenched in your brain that it becomes the truth. And that's why all of these propaganda psyop campaigns across generations, it makes your head hurt. Think about all of the propaganda that we've been pumped with, right? Not just on the whole anti-racist stuff, but you know, the trans stuff, the net zero stuff, all of this other stuff, right? All these other propaganda campaigns, they're nothing but to beat you into psychological submission. We have to be just keep willing to see through it, ladies and gentlemen. Think about it. This organization, as I said before, contributions. Black History Wales 365. I don't think it's controversial to say that Wales doesn't really have any black history. I don't think that's controversial to say. As I mentioned, on the scale of the UK as a whole, you only need to go back to the 50s, right? Just before the Windrush generation and stuff like that started coming in, to see that Britain was essentially a complete ethno-state. Britain as a whole, right? And Wales, if you look at the ONS maps, is still, for the most part, very ethnically homogenous when you go outside of the cities, right? When you go outside of Cardiff or Swansea or Newport, you see very ethnically homogenous areas for the most part. And I don't actually know how accurate that ONS data is. I know you guys are like me, you're very skeptical. I think we have very, very good reason to be. But this is a negation of Welsh history. But they want to celebrate it year round. If you want to celebrate your history, maybe you get one day to do it, right? St. David's Day or something like that. But no, if you want to fly a Welsh flag, much as they demonize the St. George's flag in England, right, as oppressive or divisive or whatever, right? That's seen as discriminatory or evil because you get to celebrate your heritage all year round. Now, they're saying they want to do that at the same. But really, if you think about it, you go back 100 years, or not even that, there'd be no history of this kind to celebrate. And that's just the reality. Not because I don't necessarily not because I hate anybody or anything like that. It's because it's not. It's just not the history of these isles. It just isn't. Then you go back, 1,000, 2,000, right? 3,000, 4,000 years when we were, pagan cultures, Celts basically, when we were living as the Celts did, right? Where's the black history? BBC will want to convince you that there is by supplanting people into their new series and stuff like that, but it never was the case. And the propaganda campaign will try and convince you that it was, but it never was the case. Never ever was the case. They also want to put through like segregated, history of youth awards. So they got Black History Youth Awards, Black Lives Matter Policy Forum, which is literally, in my opinion, a terrorist organization, Zero Racism Wales campaign, unless it's obviously racism against white people to be able to further their political agendas. All the while doing so, whilst lying and lying and lying and lying, such as saying that George Floyd was murdered. Which obviously then we know that he wasn't. He died of a drug overdose, probably a mix of stress and COVID and all other things, right? His heart was, what was it like? He had cardiomegaly like 150 times or something like that. I think his heart was about 150% the size that it should have been, right? First off, we can go through the empirical stuff, ladies and gentlemen. We can go through the empirical stuff. So you'll remember, now, if I quickly bring this up on screen... bear with me 2 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to bring something up on screen for you. You'll remember this if you were paying attention at any point, which obviously I didn't necessarily see this at first either, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm not being, snide or anything like that when I say this. This is, campaigns that we were taken in by, if you were like me, right? I'm just trying to reposition this so that it comes up on screen a little bit easier to see. Right, I've got it in position for you. Take a look at this. You will have seen this before. This is actually George Floyd's medical report. Now, I'll just zoom out a little bit just to make it... There we are. So you can now see it on full screen. You can now see that it's his name at the top. And this was something that was heavily, censored at the time, no other word to describe it. And you'll see there, section 3 of the report says, no life-threatening injuries identified, no facial, oral, mucosal, or, conjunctival? Is that how you say it? Conjunctival petechiae? I'm not sure what these terms actually mean. Obviously, I'm not a medical scientist, right? No scalp, soft tissue, or brain injuries or anything like that. No injuries to the front of his body from this supposedly horrendous knee on the back of the neck that was supposedly enough to kill him. However, he did have fentanyl in his system to the dose of 11 nanograms per milliliter and 5.6 nanograms per milliliter of norfentanyl. Now, the relationship between those two, as far as I'm aware, essentially gives you an idea of how recently the dose was ingested, right? Because norfentanyl, from what I understand, and I'll bring another document up on screen now to sort of give a little bit more information about this. Norfentanyl is the inactive metabolite of fentanyl. So this is a document from Gary L. Collins to a Mr. Argoe, in reference to a Lyman Moses homicide in the state of Delaware. This is from June of 2021. And this is where I'm going to find out like roughly how much fentanyl will be enough to kill somebody, right, is what I'm looking for. A fentanyl blood level of what will be considered toxic enough to kill somebody, right? So this is... If I bring this up on screen for you now in a moment as well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just repositioning it so it looks, so it's easier to read. So what he says is norfentanyl is an inactive metabolite. This means that norfentanyl does not have, if I just reposition this, un momento, does not have any pharmacological effects on the body, not have any pharmacological effects. Since the concentration of norfentanyl is much lower, so the document's on screen now, the concentration of norfentanyl is much lower than the fentanyl, it suggests that the parent drug was recently absorbed or consumed, and that the norfentanyl detected is likely a byproduct of the metabolism of fentanyl. And this is his expression. So his responses to the reasonable degree of medical and scientific certainty, and is his opinion, right? Question 4 is the key one, which I wanted to draw your attention to, though, ladies and gentlemen. This document will be linked down below as well. Hopefully, be able to show. If not, I'll link the link down below to where you can go and download it or whatever, or view it. Understanding that every person is different, do you have an opinion as to a level that you have seen which would normally cause a person to overdose? If so, what is that opinion? In the vast majority of cases, so this is his answer, fentanyl concentration over 3 nanograms per milliliter in an individual with no other anatomic, natural disease or infectious etiology to cause death will be attributed to the fentanyl and other drugs detected. A lower level of fentanyl may cause death if other drugs cause respiratory suppression or sedation is present, such as alcohol, other opiates such as heroin, morphine, oxycodone, or benzodiazepines such as Xanax or Valium. Now, why is this important, ladies and gentlemen? You saw that George Floyd's level was 11, but he also had other comorbidities, which I believe weren't also talked about too much at the time, namely COVID. Right, and I believe he had some other respiratory conditions as well, not to mention one of the things that happens with fentanyl is respiratory suppression, which is why he was saying before he was put on the ground, he could not breathe, right? That's why he was saying before he was put on the ground, he could not breathe, right? This is Stephen Crowder highlighting this with the footage that he showed on his show, which if only many people like myself would have been able or would have seen this at the time, would have known about this at the time, we would have been a lot more intellectually armed to be able to deal with the massive propaganda campaign that came afterwards. This is part of the video on Stephen Crowder's show showing not only George Floyd's fluctuations between compliance and non-compliance, right? Not to mention the allegations that he was claustrophobic, even though he was literally just taken out of a car, which was much smaller than the police cruiser, right? Also the fact that he'd spat out something in the back of the police cruiser, which was likely fentanyl in and of itself, from what I've heard. He was saying he couldn't breathe long before he was put on the ground, right? He was saying, oh, there we
Watching
go.
it again, more of the we'll roll down the window and more accommodation.
Look at it, look at it.
We can fix it, but not while you're standing out.
Okay, man. God, y'all do me bad, man. Man, I don't want to try to win. I don't want to try to win.
I don't want to die to
I don't
win.
want to win. I'm claustrophobic. I'm claustrophobic. I got anxiety. I don't want to do nothing to them.
I'll roll the window down. What, a third or fourth time?
When I start breathing, it's going to go off on me, man.
Hold your legs down.
Okay. Let me count to 3. Let me count to 3 and I'm going in. Please.
They let him count to 3 like it's going.
So I'm going to pause that a minute. Yeah, I hit transition a little bit early. Sorry, guys. I hit transition a little bit early on this one. But you're seeing here he's going from compliance to non-compliance. They're being very lenient with him, right? One of the biggest lies that we were told at that time is that they were just inherent racial police brutality. They're cooperating with him a lot. There's a reason, obviously, why the prosecution and others didn't want you to see this body cam footage at the time where this was all in its prominence, right? When this was all hitting up and this was fresh in the memory, right? They didn't want you to see this because they wanted a predetermined verdict. They wanted Derek Chauvin to do the fall for something which I am strongly the belief that he did not do.
Going in the first pool dip of the season when it's cold.
Oh, boy.
And here you go is where they finally say, okay, enough is enough, and they need to get him into the car. And by the way, he just said, put me on the ground.
I'm claustrophobic. I'm telling you, but you're not working with me. God, I'm claustrophobic, man. In the
Let's
car.
go over here. I'm going to pull you in.
In the car. In the front. Please. You're not getting in the front. I'm claustrophobic. So I'll be in the car. Okay, man, okay. I'm not a bad guy, man. In the car. I'm not a bad guy. Man.
They're not even touching.
Please, please, take a seat. Please, man. Please. No, take a seat. I can't choke. I can't breathe.
I can't choke. I can't breathe. Okay. And then they end up finally pulling him out of the car. So we've seen enough. That's enough for the clip.
So he's saying there, and he's obviously a high-stress situation. Don't know exactly how verbal eloquent he was at the time anyway, but saying, I can't choke, I can't breathe. He's saying there, I can't breathe. And obviously he's working himself into a frenzy as well. Knows obviously the concoction of drugs that were in his system, in particular fentanyl, right? Knowing that he'd been caught doing something that he was supposed to do. Knowing he obviously has a long history of crime, right? He was a career criminal whom the left have tried to obviously now venerate as a saint, basically. And obviously he knew what fate was going to await him. He knew that he was going to lose his freedom, and that's why he's trying to do everything possible to seemingly worm his way out of this situation. I don't like necessarily revisiting this 5 years later, but this is one of the biggest lies that we ever got told, and I still know people that believe this. I still know people that believe this, that he was murdered, and the only times that he was saying that he couldn't breathe was when Officer Chauvin had him on the ground and with his knee on his neck, and that's just outright not true. but we weren't shown any of this camera footage at the time. But people like the Race Council of Wales, people like Race Council Cymru want to still peddle these lies. And in fact, one of the things I think would be quite interesting for you to watch, ladies and gentlemen, I'll link it down below, is that you can say this is distasteful, you can say this is not exactly scientific, right, obviously, but Stephen Crowder went and actually recreated the experiment of being stuck under an officer's knee like this for the period of time that George Floyd was, right, to see if it would actually result in fatal, complications, should we say. As you can imagine, obviously it did not. And the thing is, a lot of testimony from the officers, which they were basically coerced into giving, would have exonerated Chauvin because they knew that this was a technique that they'd been shown how to use and that they were cleared to use it, right? There were so many lies saying this is not an authorized police technique when it absolutely was, right? You can have the discussion on whether it should be an authorized police technique or not, but at the time, as far as I know anyway, this was a perfectly legal police technique to use that they were taught. And then obviously to go along with the lie, to appease the activists, to try and prevent this bigger situation for what we in the UK might call to appease community tensions, right? They went along with this lie and saying that, no, it's not a technique we're supposed to use, it's not anything that we're taught. Complete lies. But a funny instance, we won't play the entire clip, but here's Stephen Crowder actually being the recipient of this technique. I don't know if these people are actually police officers, right? Maybe he says it earlier on in the video and I haven't seen it, right? I don't know whether these people are actually police officers, but again, it's showing the absurdity of what's going on. But there are people, activists, who have the ear of our government that want to run with this. That's why we absolutely should be caring, should be mocking, and should be scorning it.
One.
Okay, all right. So
Timer
Neil
down.
Neil.
Kneel on my neck here, shoulder.
Oh, pause the timer.
Oh my goodness.
It's okay.
There we go. All right, now I'll roll it
It's
back.
actually more uncomfortable for me because I have a bad shoulder. So my left shoulder right now is popped out of the socket, but
It's
that has nothing
5
to do with-
seconds in and you don't like it.
Oh no, of
Yeah,
course
no,
I
of
don't.
course.
Already complaining.
Hey, you know what, Dave? Sometimes you deserve to be arrested.
That's true.
He's specifically meaning you, Dave.
No, my response is agreement.
I think they were lower on the legs there, Brendan.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think they were more like on the hamstring area.
Okay.
All right.
There you go.
Right, I'll fast forward it a bit for you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll fast forward it a bit. Long story short, obviously here, this is the last 10 seconds. Obviously, long story short, which obviously you'll know if you do tune into Stephen Crowder similarly regularly like I do. I find him quite entertaining, and I find him a pretty good source of information as well. He was one of the first ones that leaked he was the first one that leaked the tip that he got from the ATF guys detailing that they were the trans and anti-fascist ideology written on the bullets that were used in the Charlie Kirk assassination. Right, he leaked those. He was completely right, and they were sent to him by his source because they were concerned that the information was going to be buried. And you saw that with how many people came out afterwards saying that they were lies. They done the same thing with earlier shootings, like the I think it was there was the Tennessee one that he broke, that it was a trans shooter, right? I can't remember exactly which one it was. Was it Covenant? I think it was Covenant School, the Covenant School shooting. I think it was that he also leaked information from that and was again completely vindicated. I think he's a pretty good source. I think he's one of the ones that takes what he does very seriously, even though he's predominantly a comedy He's predominantly a comedy outlet, right? I already find that the comedy itself in many instances is quite funny, right? But and again, a mark of the fact that in many years you have the freedom to do the kind of skits that they do, whereas in the UK you probably get thrown in prison, right? But oftentimes a lot of what he says happens then to be correct and true. So I think he's pretty good. I think he's a pretty good source in that regard. And then this is the last 10 seconds of that. We're needless to say he obviously doesn't die, yeah, here's the sort of conclusive proof that it wasn't the knee on the neck that killed George Floyd.
You know.
Time
It's
for
true.
10
You,
seconds.
Dave, you in their third
9,
chair, nice
8,
and comfy.
7,
It's very
After
nice.
having just relieved yourself.
5,
Oh, 5.
4,
We're almost there.
3,
4, 2,
1.
1. And now we beat it by 2 seconds.
Happy New Year.
All right, Tokunawan,
There
get
you
off.
go.
Get off. Okay, good. There
All
we
right,
go.
now,
We're
get him
done.
up.
All right.
Get him up. Help
There
him
we
up.
go.
So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. There's your conclusive proof There's your conclusive proof, again, being slightly satirical when I say this, that it wasn't the knee on the neck that killed George Floyd, but obviously these activists want you to believe that because they need you to go along with their plans, which if you're a Welsh person or if you're pro-Wales and the pro-Welsh people, to go along with your own destruction, basically. And that's what they want. That's what they want. They hate you. Make no mistake about it, they hate you. And a lot of the stories they draw on as well, I've no doubt that the people that they list on the website, the whole Windrush stuff, they're lovely people for the most part, right? But it does harken back to greater things that we need to talk about with the opinions, with the opinion polling that was done at the time, right? How it changed very, very quickly, right? And how it's been so long, it's been so many generations that the will and wants of the British people have been absolutely toppled and stamped on, right? So you had, for example, during when people were first starting to come in, and this is stuff which I'll just pull up on screen for you because a lot of the places where you try to go and get these are like password or not password, subscription based. And, I just don't have the funds to be able to do that at the moment. But you have, for example, one thing that I asked Grok, for example, were around the time when the Windrush generation was coming in, so through like 1948 to 1960, what were attitudes like towards non-European or non-white immigration during this era? And it was very stark how quickly it changed. So there was Gallup polls done starting in 1954, for example, focusing on something which they referred to at the time as coloured or Commonwealth immigration, often a proxy for non-white migrants from places like the Caribbean, India, or Africa, right? Earlier insights are more qualitative, drawn from mass observation surveys and directives, a social research project that collected public writings, diaries, and observations on everyday life, including race relations. The sources reveal a shift from relatively tolerant or conditional acceptance in the early to mid-1950s to widespread hostility by the late 1950s, driven by economic pressures, housing shortages, and events like 1958 riots. Attitudes were marked by underlying racial prejudice, ambivalence, and fears of social change. Maybe their fears were at least somewhat founded. You only have to look at England to see that. With non-white immigrants often viewed as economic competitors or cultural threats. It does seem many instances of that having come true, where you go and see now that many non-white, particularly from areas like Asia, like Bangladesh and Pakistan and areas like that, they've openly made English towns and cities into their enclaves, right? And many of their representatives, such as the Tower Hamlets representatives you talked about before, will openly campaign as Bangladeshi nationalists for the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party in Bangladesh. But if a British person campaigns being a British nationalist, they're an evil oppressor. In Britain, a British person campaigns as a British nationalist in Britain, they're an evil oppressor, but it's perfectly okay for Bangladeshi nationalists to campaign as Bangladeshi nationalists in Bangladesh whilst then also being representative of Tower Hamlets. You don't think there's any conflict of interest there? Sage, I'm not even going at you because I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know I'm preaching to the converted, so to speak, for the most part. So what was the data like in 1954? So according to Grok, the data in this poll asked about integrated workplaces, racial hierarchies, and indicating early strains in race relations. Majority rejected, I'll bring this up on screen just so you can read it as well. A majority rejected wholesale overt racism, such as notions of white superiority or formal colour bars, specific percentages not detailed in sources but described as wholesale rejection. However, the mere inclusion of such questions highlighted tensions. Direct quote, the fact that Gallup saw fit to ask question about integrated workplaces indicated that race relations were already strained, yet the wholesale rejection of white superiority of a colour bar was somewhat more reassuring. If you can find these, ladies and gentlemen, and you can put more information about this in the comments, please do, because as I said, a lot of these I can't get into without, signing up to subscription or whatever it is, which I simply can't do at the moment. 72% of respondents favoured immigration in 1956, so long as work was available. in many instances now, we're now seeing that work is not so available anymore, with 37% supporting free entry and only 18% calling for controls at that time, suggesting a pragmatic, job-focused acceptance of non-white migrants at this time, with limited outright opposition. I think a lot of people now, again, like the people who were on the beaches of Normandy, like our soldiers were on the beaches of Normandy, looking up in the sky and seeing what their country would turn into, maybe those attitudes would be a lot different. But a lot of people at this time, I think, were obviously quite ignorant of how these things would turn out, right? They were obviously very, very ignorant of how these things would turn out. They didn't have to deal with the long-term downstream consequences of these things, right? 1958. Only really when you start getting people in vast bigger numbers that you see then they start supplanting our culture and our people with their own and with their culture, right? After Notting Hill and Nottingham riots, 79.1% supported immigration controls, rising to 81.5% in the London area. Additionally, they said that they would probably move, 61% said that they would probably move if large numbers of black people settled in their neighbourhood. Only 9% solely blamed non-whites for the riots. 16% wanted restrictions targeted at non-whites alone, indicating that while attitudes hardened, they were not uniformly racist. Some respondents showed nuance. What they're showing there, ladies and gentlemen, is something that is intrinsic to human nature. Intrinsic to human nature, which is in-group preference and the natural consequences of that in the aftermath of a conflict that had occurred between two different groups. Like when your friend stands up at a bar, you stand up with him, right? That's basically what happened, except you supplant things, you bring in other factors like race, and you bring in the fact that it wasn't just standing up at a bar, it was a full-blown riot. You've seen there's British people, see, this wasn't happening before, when it was their own British people. We've brought people in, and now we've had this big conflict occur, right? We're going to side with our own people. And the only thing is, it's only British people that would be demonized for doing that. Or it's only Western white people that would be demonized for doing that. Anywhere else in the world, you wouldn't be demonized for doing that. Any other group in the world, they wouldn't be demonized for doing that in their own home. In their own home. That's the thing to remember. This is the home of the British people. And like you reserve the right, when you have a guest or a visitor in your home, to tell them to leave at any point, for any reason, you thought the British people would have had that right as well, but they've had that right trampled on, and they've had their home trampled on, and then they had entire generations of their kids being preyed on by predatory foreigners, right? All the while the government blamed them and blamed them and blamed them. Got to think how far back a lot of the initiatives that we were seeing, the seeds that were being sown all the way back then. And now we are the ones that have to reap the harvest, right? Or the generation before us, and particularly in the big cities in England and stuff like that, obviously, are now reaping the fruits of that. Support for controls by 1961 then had risen to 73% nationally, reflecting a continued shift towards restrictionism as migration flows increased. You're seeing how far back there again. This is not to say that I hate anybody or anything like that, or to say that, Britain is absolutely perfect or wherever. It's just to show that public attitude was strongly against more and more immigration, and that attitude has not only been the wants of the British people from that have not only been not listened to, but they've been outright demonized, and the government turned on them to continue bringing in more and more people that they did not want here. It's the whole notion, supposedly democracy is power to the people and they can have a say in their future, they can have a say in their governance or whatever. Well, all the way back to the mid-50s, they could see that is not true. They could see that is not true. And you could say that they were wrong or they weren't wrong or wherever. That's a different thing than saying this is what the British people wanted and they were not given it in their own home. Supposedly democracy is the thing that allows them to have a say in their governance and a say in their future. Well, that say was taken away from them. That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest, lie of this whole Windrush and the Race Council Cymru that they're trying to push with all these quote-unquote stories, and that you called and we came. Call was never sent. The call was never sent. Yes, we would have had a lot of hardship trying to rebuild after World War II, but we could have done it. We could have done it. We didn't need anybody else. It's easy for me to say now in my lovely air-conditioned or centrally heated room speaking into a microphone and a webcam. Yes, it's easy for me to say I never went through the hardships that generation did. But it could have been done. It could have been done. But it was the first step, seemingly, of a government in particular taking the easier route when it would have been much more fruitful in the long run, which is what I talked about in the last episode as well, where I talked about taking things that are easy, right, in the short run and make you feel better in the short run, but then you have to pay for that in the long run, right? If we'd paid for it more, for longer in that time after World War II, maybe we would have had a lot less problems now. But having just had one of the most destructive wars in the entire civilization up to that point, I can understand why. I can understand why there was this want for hardship to end. I can fully understand that. This is why I'm not denigrating that generation of Brits or whatever for not seeing how this would be used in the future. They could never have seen how this would be used, how this would be propagandized, and how many lies would be spun about them, how many lies would be spun about their home, and how a lot of people that had come in would try to co-opt this home of their people, right? And the Iranians now try and subjugate their future descendants at that time, especially having just gone through one of the most destructive wars in history. And with the only nation, I believe, to be in it from start to finish, pretty much. The only nation opposed to the Nazis that were in it from start to finish. Again, this is not a commentary on World War II itself, whether we should have got involved, whether we shouldn't have got involved, who was the bad guy, who was the good guy, was there a clear good and bad guy? Not discussion. Point is, it does seem to me, at least, that the easier option was taken by the government, and whether they sort of had these initiatives in mind back then, I don't know, to, alleviate labour shortfalls and stuff like that, whatever it may be. And the people sort of went along with it for a while. Very quickly, opinion changed. And then they had their rights gradually more and more trampled on. I don't think you can blame the people then, even though it does seem that they did see what it would bring, judging by how opinions changed, right? Judging by how many said that they would move away if their community would then not be dominated by, not be, ethnically homogenous. You can't necessarily blame them for being ignorant of how Britain would be now. But ultimately, we have to deal with what we have now. But why is it again a lie? Not only about all the George Floyd stuff, not only about the whole fentanyl stuff, not only about all that. You look at the stats, and again, stats on these things you do sometimes have to be careful of, because our government often doesn't record things for politicized reasons. They don't want people knowing the ethnicity of certain crimes committed and stuff like that because it goes against the narrative. So when we're looking at this, for example, when we're talking about, because when they say equality, what they really mean is equity. They want the system to be equitized. So meaning you have equal proportions of every single person. Right? What that means is that if you have 91 black and 19 white going to prison, well, you need to send more whites to prison to make up for that, or you need to send less black people to prison. That's what ultimately is going to mean if you go with this equity system, which is what equality is used as a cover for. What does that mean? It means that you not send lots of violent criminals to prison for racial reasons, for racially politicized reasons, and then you end up with Irina Zarutska. Then you end up with that young girl, then you end up with that woman that recently got torched on the Chicago subway. The guy had 72 prior arrests. And again, the whole George Floyd thing, how it plays into the whole racism narrative, which is completely fake. Right? At least the way that they portray it. Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers that we do have. Especially, this is where it comes down to a notion of per capita. Per capita often strikes the heart of a lot of these arguments, and is often a thing that lefties really don't want to talk about, because it really goes against their narrative, right? But when we're having a look, so there are certain documents, for example, that talk about this. One of them, for example, looking at the government's reports of arrests. This was published 3rd of July, 2024. And when we're looking at arrests by ethnicity, this is what you will see, at least in this document anyway. This is from April 2022 to March 2023. This is the most up-to-date, really, that I can find. and I'll bring it up on screen for you in a moment. Let me just, there we are. There we are. Okay, let me just recenter this. But it shows you the arrest rate per different demographics. I'm not exactly sure if this is broken down by specific crime, but we've got more stuff to go over with regards to that, so just bear with me. But you see graphs that look like this. And you can definitely see there's a lot of overrepresentation of certain individuals. Namely, for example, if I tab over to it a moment, the black populations, in one instance here, whatever this one is vastly overrepresented versus white, several fold, about 5 or so times, I believe it is. You have so much double. Black Caribbeans are about double what the whites are, 1.5. For black Africans, black in general, about double. So, are we not going to send these people to prison if they're potentially violent criminals and stuff like that? Or are we not? Is that what we're not going to do? But then you break it down by per 1,000, for example. Well, that's arrest rates per 1,000. And again, if I bring this up for you as well, you can see it here. And this really shows as well, when a lot of these activists will try to say, oh, look how many white people got arrested. Yes, but they deliberately fail to mention and exclude to mention that Britain, at least at this present moment in time, is still a majority white nation. Because the native populace, right, the native population is white population. But this is what the table will look like in terms of number of arrests versus arrest rate per 1,000. And this is the whole per capita thing, basically. So you have here number of arrests, 15,000, or is it 16,000? 15,000 for black other, 14,000 for black Caribbean, right? Now you go all the way down because there was a total of 668,979, right? The arrest rate for white individuals here, right, across this time frame, 9.4, but a massively increased total, right? Massively increased number of arrests. So it's going to show here that we have significant problems with certain elements of the population. We have certain parts of the population that for various reasons seem to be committing more crimes. Because this is the thing. Police are often scared. As far as I'm aware anyway. Police will be often scared to try and arrest black individuals because they saw what happened to George Floyd. Something was to happen, they'll have riots and all of these things because of how much this anti-racism framework is ingrained in. The whole thing, that's why Irina Zarutska's killer was let out. That's why the guy was let out after 72 arrests, right? Because they're often scared of being called racist. You see things like that with the gangs, right? Yet you still have massive overrepresentation of certain people in these groups. You still have massive representations of certain people. This one is from a document titled Homicide in England and Wales. In fact, I'll bring this one up as well. I'll quickly bring this this document up as well. Here we go. So this is what I wanted to bring up now. And I talked about before, Grok's breakdown of certain demographics obviously being more represented for things like homicide, theft, all of these things. When we're looking at age, sex, and ethnicity of convicted suspects, for example, obviously you have a lot more convicted males than females, right, as we would expect. But in this little footnote in the bottom of this document here, which I will bring up on screen for you in just a moment, it really highlights the kind of problem that we're dealing with. And it's a reality that a lot of these activists, particularly the anti-racism activists and all of these people, don't want to confront. They don't want to go anywhere near this stuff, right? So have a look at this graph now, for example. And again, this document will be linked down below as well. Age, sex, and ethnicity of convicted suspects. For a 3-year period, year ending March 2022 to year ending March 2024, most suspects of convicted of homicide were male, about 92%. And that's what this graph here is conveying, right? Mostly in the age range of 16 to 24. Ironically, you have more females than males being convicted, from about 35 to 44 and 45 to 54. See, it's weird, right? The younger you are, right? The younger people, more likely for males to be the majority of homicide convictions, and then as you get older, it then tends to be dominated by females. That's quite interesting. Wonder it's because of how many unhappy relationships or whatever. But then look at this at the bottom. For the 3-year period ending, again, March 22 to 24, looking at the principal suspect of a homicide offence, 2/3 of those convicted were identified as white. This was a lower representation than in the general population based on the 2021 census figures. Around 1 in 5 suspects were identified as black, 5 times higher than the representation in the general population. Around 1 in 10 were identified as Asian. So in order to reach kind of equality or whatever, you have to think of how many cases more would have to be ignored on racial grounds. We've already seen how many young British girls have been damaged and many instances murdered because of how many cases have been ignored because of racial reasons. But yet our Welsh Government wants to go full steam ahead with this in pursuit of making Wales, quote-unquote, anti-racist. Well, if that's what making Wales anti-racist means, well, then consider me in staunch opposition to whatever, quote-unquote, anti-racist Wales would be. Because I can see here, it's discrimination against the Welsh people. That's what it is. It will be active discrimination against the Welsh people for political reasons. That's what it will be. And then you have a look at this one, for example. So this is Statistics on Ethnicity and the Criminal Justice System, 2022. You get down to offender characteristics in Section 7. In 2022, 77% of all males prosecuted for indictable offences were from the white ethnic group. The proportion of defendants from the black ethnic group was 11% of all male prosecutions compared to 6% of all female prosecutions. Given the fact that, again, they make up about 4% around this time of the general population, that's an overrepresentation of 1.5 to nearly 3 times, depending on if it's a man or a woman, right? And the really sad thing is as well, and this is why I think, again, it's a massive cultural problem, is because you only need as well, and this is the sad thing when we're looking at, particularly in the youth in this country and stuff like that, the percentage of homicide victims. And this is the thing where, again, they want to go systemic discrimination and stuff like that. Well, you need to address also that not only are they vastly overrepresented for the proportion of the population in things like homicide, 1 in 5, you also then need to address, right? Where is it? It's this graph here, which I'll just try and make sure it's centered on screen for you, that over 1/3 of homicide victims, right? Over 1/3, nearly 40% of homicide victims are black people from the ages of 16 to 24. Very young. And what is prominent at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, usually gang culture. Gang culture, where it seems there's a good amount of these people that are going around killing each other. And then you think of other things, drugs. You think of, someone said something to the other one's, or someone slept with someone's girlfriend or whatever, or there was another crime that occurred and it was a revenge thing. Who knows, right? But you have not only vast overrepresentation in people committing crimes, homicides, then you have vast amounts of overrepresentation in the victims, particularly young victims. I don't see how that's the fault of somebody that looks like me. Maybe I'm uneducated. Maybe I'm not able to see it or wherever, Or maybe I do see it, I just, don't go along with what the activists and all those people want me to say, right? But that's a cultural problem. That's obviously a cultural problem. And I'm not one of these people at this moment in time that will go ahead and say, oh yeah, it's just all about their race, it's just because they're this color, because you do have people that don't engage in these activities, right? You'd have black people that don't engage in these activities and are perfectly good people, right? Not me making the case then that they ever should have been allowed to come to Britain or anything like that. That's a separate argument. That's a separate argument. But there's a lot of good people who have different skin color to people that look like me, right? So it's quite clearly something else. There's something wrong in this culture. Whether it's fatherlessness, whether it's deadbeat dads, right? Whether it's other things that are coming in, right? Other factors, you name them off. But you've got serious problems in this demographic in particular, and quote-unquote racial justice in the way that these people want to bring it in, not going to fix it. Not going to fix it. It's going to make it worse. It's going to make it worse in an already strained, already on the breaking point country. And people, politicians especially want to be careful now playing games like this. Because people, make no mistake, have had enough. People have had enough. And these, again, long-standing problems. We talked about long-standing problems. I want to go over this in a moment because there's one bit of this next clip which I want to play you. Well, not this next clip, but the one after that I want to play you. In some areas, you can't even talk about this stuff, even as much as a decade and a half ago. You have to talk about it in different languages because if people around, you hear what you're talking about, then you're liable to potentially get attacked or wherever in certain areas. The example which we'll go through is Tower Hamlets in a moment, which I'll show you a video somebody sent to me of them going up and showing this at the time 13 years ago, showing again how far back the problem goes, not only in our lifetimes but long before that, as we talked about before. This was the example that somebody put in my comment section. Remember we talked about before when we were talking about Lainie Williams, when speculating on who it could have been. I don't believe the information had come out when I recorded that podcast. That somebody also commented down below that there was a brawl between vape shop and barbers in Llanelli, who appeared to be of migrant origin, right? And I don't know what actually happened, whether the police went and prosecuted anybody because of this or wherever. There's only a short that somebody was able to send me because of a screen recording. And it'll be linked down below as well, obviously. But this is another example of that seemingly ethnic violence, right? Ethnic minorities going to bat against each other for whatever reason. Whether, again, you can speculate about the motives, that a lot of the businesses, quote unquote, you see nowadays are fronts for other things and whatever. But this is the example that was sent to me, which I'll play for you on screen now. This is in Llanelli, which is up Swansea way. You can see here it's vape shop versus barbers in Llanelli. And you can see they're having this fight in the middle of the street, right? Not sure who that lady was getting involved was. But it's another example. It's another example of what we're seeing going on, it would seem. And just makes you ask the question, do we really need this? Do we have anything to gain by this, by importing more of this? Is this enriching to our culture? Personally, I would say no. I don't think that's controversial to say. Don't think it's controversial to say that whatsoever, right? Don't think it's controversial to say that I don't want my my country, I don't want my country turning out like the areas we're going to talk about in a moment. One of the biggest ones is are areas like Tower Hamlets. Tower Hamlets in England, right? Which I'll show you this example now. This was something that somebody sent to me, and really shows even back, 13 years ago. This was recorded. How people were trying to talk about this and the danger of talking about these things, because people don't want you to talk about these things. Government don't want you to talk about these things. Obviously, people that have come here from outside don't want you to talk about sentiment that could be perceived as hostile to them, right? For obvious reasons. I understand that. And the person recording this had to do this. He's a Welshman. Had to record this section of the video in Welsh, because there was a good risk that if he'd spoken in English and people were able to understand what he was saying, that he could have been attacked, right? That he could have been attacked. Again, what does that tell you? You can't even talk about certain things in a supposed country that is one of the bastions for free speech and freedom of expression. You can't even talk about certain issues because people who, again, are not of the people of these lands will attack you for it. could potentially attack you for it. Here's that video that got sent to me, ladies and gentlemen, and again, you can find this down below as well. This should really, really shock you. Oh.
Helo, shmai Brahma. Ma'n i'n canol rewl yn Wembley yn Llundain. Mae'n peryglus i ni bod ma. Mae rhaid i ni siarad Cymraeg yn y tîsyn hyn i cadw ni'n yn saff. Os bydden nhw'n gwybod beth i ni'n neud ma'n un heddi, bydde fe weddol dangerous i ni bod ma ar y foment. Ond fel chi gweld, mae'r lle wedi altro. Neb jyst o'r glad yn ar ôl ma. Fi deud cwpanau pêl droed y byd. Fe partyn o'r glad. Wel, sy'n mynd i gweld lot o... Sy'n mynd i gweld lot o bobl o gladyn ma, wedyn nhw, sneb ar ôl, sneb ar ôl. Beth sy'n mynd mlaen man hyn yn... Mae rhywbeth yn hollol wrong yna, mae rhywbeth yn hollol wrong. Okay?
So there you go. You saw there that he had to do that entire section. He had to do that entire section in Welsh. And in fact, I'll go back and I'll reread it for you now as well, ladies and gentlemen. So for those of you who are listening, not watching, I will read along with it now as I bring it just back up on screen. It was in Wembley, by the way. It was outside Wembley, so don't believe it was outside, Tower Hamlets specifically. But it was in Wembley. And I'll just bring this back up on screen. And you can see here he's talking. And he says, we'll just bring this over here. Hello, good morning. We are in the middle of Wembley in London. It could be very dangerous for us here, which is why the section is in Welsh. As you can see, the place has altered and there are hardly any British people left here. I'll put it on a little bit of low volume just so you see. This is going to be a venue for the World Cup. The visitors for the World Cup are not going to see many British people here. As well, just if I bring this back here. The guy's looking over. You can see the guy looking over at the camera here as he walks past. Where is it? Imagine if that should terrify you right there. That guy right there. Is it just me? Or does anybody else get put in the mind of that guy that was outside the Britannia hotel looking deadpan at the camera after he'd just been in to seemingly try and assault not a young girl, but like a teenager or her immunocompromised mother, and then the police ended up arresting her. Remember that incident? We talked about it before. Clip will be linked down below. It's my best done clip of a podcast so far on this YouTube channel. It's up on Rumble, I believe, as well, but it'll be linked down below on the respective platform. Just imagine, he is speaking English. This is danger conveyed very, very easily here, in my opinion. We're told not to stereotype. We're told not to jump to conclusions. How much more do we have to put up with? How much more do we have to put up with between don't look back in anger, don't jump to conclusions, don't stereotype and all of this stuff? Literally looking over the shoulder here, and obviously guy's going to be skeptical because Welsh should be a language likely that he doesn't understand, or maybe he does. Maybe he does, and he can actually understand what he's saying, and whatever thoughts are going through his head of what he wants to do to this gentleman right now for highlighting the problem, the fact that a British city now has seemingly no British people in it. And obviously it's not exactly zero, but the fact that it has been ethnically completely replaced. And that's actually not a good thing. It's actually not a good thing. But I just let this video finish out now. She says, the visitors to the World Cup are not going to see many British people. There is something very serious going on in our country, something very, very wrong. And I think it's kind of difficult to argue against that there isn't something seriously bad going on in this country and has been brewing for a long, long time. And that, again, me personally, I chiefly hold our government responsible above anything else, above anyone else, right? It's our government that are chiefly responsible above all else, right? At least that's the way that I see it. Anyway, because they are the ones at the heart of all these initiatives. If they'd done what they were supposed to do, if they'd done what the British people wanted them to do, we never ever would have been in any of these problems. None of these conversations would have ever been on anybody's lips, right? None of these problems wouldn't have happened. Gangs wouldn't have happened, right? You wouldn't have entire communities now that are openly declaring how much they love being apart from Britain. You wouldn't have people that don't come from the people here openly touting how much they not love coming from the people and that they hate the British people. You wouldn't have all of these problems. You wouldn't have all of these problems if successive governments had done what they were supposed to. It's just the reality. And that's why I think, shouldn't necessarily be holding hatred in our heart towards anybody just because they look different or just because they're from a different place. It's our government that have stabbed us in the back and used them as the knife. It's our government that have shot us in the back and loaded them as the bullets into the gun. Now, many people have indeed come across because they want to do us harm, right? They want to enact a bunch of evil things to us. They want to do things like spread the caliphate and all of these things, right? There are people that have come across, they want to do that. A guy with the AK-47 tattoo on his face that came across saying he was going to slice up Irish babies, right? Right, there are evil people from many other areas of the world. Yeah, sure. Not everybody is. Not everybody is. Just because not everybody is doesn't mean that everybody belongs here. Right? I think that's perfectly, perfectly okay to say. And it was our government to protect us first and foremost. And you only have to look at things like gangs, whatever else, to understand that they have not done that. They've done the exact opposite. They have done the exact opposite. Now, This is a great example of people looking for things where really nothing is to be found and trying to make real mountains out of molehills. Pravda has been back again. Pravda has been back at it again. The Guardian has been back at it again with now deeply shocking revelations about Nigel Farage. And as you know, I actually am not that fond of Nigel Farage. I was around this time, not around this time last year, early last year, when it looked like, oh, holy shit, he might actually be doing something for the British people here. You know what I mean, right? A lot of us were Reform fanboys towards going into the last election, right? But now faces shocking new allegations, which Keir Starmer, by the way, has said that he has to come up and address, right, about racism and anti-Semitism when he was in school. In case you didn't know now, ladies and gentlemen, Nigel Farage is a relatively old man. A relatively old man. If you were wondering, I'll just quickly find it for you because I've forgotten exactly how old he is. Nigel Farage, I know he's in his 60s, but I can't remember just exactly how old he is. But fair to say, he's not a schoolboy, ladies and gentlemen. Nigel Farage is 61 years old. He was born in 1964. He's now being brought up on allegations of racism and anti-Semitism because of things that would have happened about 45 years ago. 45 years ago, when he was a teenager. It is the hectoring tone, the jeering quality in Nigel Farage's voice that brings it all back for one Peter Etedgui, however you say his name. He would sidle up to me and growl, "Hitler was right," or "gas them," sometimes adding a long hiss to stimulate the sound of the gas showers, Etedgui says, about his experience of being in a class with Nigel Farage at Dulwich College, South London. Etedgui himself is now 61 years old, but apparently these little remarks of Nigel Farage, which he's supposedly made, right? Supposedly made when he was in school, when he was between the ages of 13 and 17, have left this guy with lifelong trauma. Have seemingly left this guy with lifelong trauma for 45 to 50 years. Forgive me for being a little bit skeptical first off, but are we really taking this seriously? Is this where we are now? Etedgui, 61, is a BAFTA and Emmy-winning director and producer whose credits include Kinky Boots, McQueen, and Super Dash Man, the Christopher Reeve story. Back then, he was a 13-year-old boy at a loss at how to handle what he describes as a sudden and inexplicable intrusion of anti-Semitism in his life. Are we really going to play this game? Are we really going to play the game of edgy things, right? And you can read this for yourself, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the actual article on screen for you. You can read it if you want. Are we really going to play the game of edgy things that we said when we were 13? Is that a game we really want to play in modern political discourse nowadays? Not mention the same people that will make a massive big deal out of this will conveniently then dismiss the racial motivations of the gangs, right? Which are a lot more recent and a lot more important. But this was 45 years ago. 45 years ago, Nigel Farage supposedly said some edgy things in school. Did not all of us look up some edgy jokes on our phone to tell our friends in a competition to find who could find the most edgy? To find out who could find the most absurd, in terms of things you're not supposed to talk about, dark humor jokes? When we were on the bus going from school trips to school, or on the bus going to school in the morning, or on the way home, or to and from school trips at the end of the year, are we going to pretend that we didn't? Why is this news? Why is this news? Oh yeah, because it's been deemed as politically convenient to talk about. It's again another smear. If we're now going to hold past allegations, mind you, unsubstantiated allegations against political people nowadays, right? Bear in mind, they're also saying that it's a smear piece, because then they'll also try and, feign this level of impartiality by saying there is no claim that Nigel Farage, the man, must still hold the same views as ones ascribed to Farage, the boy, right? I mentioned that Farage, the boy, might not have actually held these views. He might have been trying to be deliberately edgy, a little bit provocatarian, right? As we do when we are teenagers, right? But again, it's being used to smear. So although they're saying that there is no claim that Farage is a Nazi, we are going to heavily imply that, right? We are going to heavily imply that by using words that he supposedly said when he was a teenager. Well then, the next time somebody calls Keir Starmer a communist, ladies and gentlemen, and the Guardian wants to be like, oh no, he's not, whatever, oh no, these are all slurs, smears, etc., right, in the same way that they do. Maybe when Keir Starmer is going to call Nigel Farage up like the little schoolboy that he seems to think that Nigel Farage is in the actual Commons, right, to explain himself, explain these actions and supposed remarks that, if they did happen, happened 45 years ago, or even longer, maybe Keir Starmer or maybe Nigel Farage would like to remind Keir Starmer and ask him to explain why a young Keir Starmer ended up in a communist spy file after joining a Czechoslovakian war camp during the Cold War, when seemingly he was a lot older than 13. As you can see on screen, it says Keir Starmer's photo that was found alongside other elements of personal information, ladies and gentlemen, after he fled to Czechoslovakia to join a work camp at the height of the Cold War, and he appeared in a communist spy file. He was 23. Not to mention as well, if we're going to grant Shamima Begum passage back to the UK, because supposedly she didn't know what she was doing when she was 15 and went off to join the friggin' jihadis, maybe we could say that Nigel Farage didn't know what he was doing when he was supposedly making a couple of anti-Semitic jokes or some edgy remarks, right? But maybe Farage would like to remind a 23-year-old Keir Starmer of the time was one of 17 students from around the globe in the 1986 scheme behind the Iron Curtain to apparently restore a memorial to victims of the Nazi atrocity. Sir Keir Starmer's full name, date and place of birth, passport number and family home and addresses are listed among the international work camp participants in a dossier discovered in the Mail's Foreign Intelligence Main Directorate Operative Files section of the Czechoslovakian Secret Police archives. His visa application, including passport photo and handwritten personal details, are kept in a separate section of the Czech Cold War State Security Service archives. Again, questionable. Do we actually believe that was what he was there for? But maybe one would like to bring up Keir Starmer on these, these dubious connections to literal communists. People are literally calling him a communist and he's ruling like a communist, right? Maybe that's a lot more pertinent, a lot more relevant, a lot more truthful. Maybe. Again, everything they accuse you of, ladies and gentlemen, everything that they accuse you of. If we're going to play this game, right, of supposed remarks and whatever, we just want to be careful playing that game, don't we? Because there's a lot of things that we could go down. There's a lot of victim testimony of gangs that we could take just purely on victim testimony then if we wanted to, if this precedent is going to be set where people have to explain themselves for their actions, supposed actions, just based on allegation many, many, many years after the fact. There's a lot of people we could put in prison or potentially even worse, make examples of, just based on testimony of young girls that tried to talk about their abuses but were labelled racist, were labelled quote-unquote child abuse. There's a lot of things we could do with that. But the game, ultimately, is just a smear. It's just a smear. And I say that as somebody that doesn't really trust or like Farage all that much anymore. You know? He has quite a dubious political history, obviously. Why did he leave at the height of Brexit, which is in theory a crowning moment of victory? Other people in the nationalist movements of the past, Enoch Powell and stuff like that, seem to exercise a lot of suspicion with regards to him. He does seem to be a lot more of a containment vehicle than people seem to realise. But smears like this are just disgusting. It's just disgusting. Think about when that woman last year, right, threw a milkshake at him because of all the labels and all of this, right? All thought it was funny. Oh, he's dripped in strawberry milkshake. Oh, how funny that is. Would it have been so funny if it was acid? Would it have been so funny if it was concrete? Because the media had done nothing but imply that he was the next, chairman or the next leader of the Fourth Reich. Would it be so funny then? I don't think so. I don't think it would. Now, speaking of these people, ladies and gentlemen, I want to use this to speak to something which is fundamental in the way that we have to view things like this now, in my opinion. Dr. Louise Raw is a great example of, again, lefties feeling so emboldened that they feel as though they can just do whatever the hell that they want. They can lay hands on whoever they want. And this is where I think our attitude, right? Our attitude towards these things, not necessarily saying our actions just yet, because you're likely to get pulled up on things unless you really have to in the heat of a moment, right? Unless somebody lays their hands on you. But what I'm saying is we should be changing our attitudes and not be so laissez-faire, and we should be prepared for things like this to happen. Louise Raw, in this instance, according to Turning Point UK, who posted this video, she's a teacher at universities and she's an anti-fascist, part of the Survivors Against Fascism movement, and is also apparently a matchwomen historian, whatever the hell that means. One of these seemingly very far lefty loon types. And she was in this street, and I'm not sure what kind of protest or whatever's going on. There's a person walking down the street with what appears to be like one of those big Bluetooth speakers, right? And a person is attacked by this person, by this Louise Raw. And obviously nothing then ends up happening. But this is how emboldened these lefties feel. This is how emboldened these lefties feel to do whatever the hell that they want without any consequence. So I'm going to play you... I'll play you this video now where you can see this altercation taking place. And you'll be able to see exactly what happened. There's no sound in this video, so I'll narrate over the top. You can see that it's some street, right? It's a street, and there's Louise Raw. She's in this black sort of dressy thing here, the long sprawl hair, and she grabs somebody. There you go. That's what I was on about. She grabs somebody, and I believe tries to take some of their equipment. I'm not sure if this guy has like a tripod or something in the back of that bag, but it's like a long bag that you would put some kind of like really big photograph on it. Like you'd roll something up and put it in this bag. It's a long cylindrical bag, and the guy is just standing there, not doing anything. She isn't. It isn't doing anything to agitate her, and here she is pointing the fingers and probably calling everybody fascists and whatever else behind her conveniently high-vis wearing cordon, right? So here you go. I'll play it one more time, and here you go. She grabs somebody. Boom. That's assault. That's assault and seemingly attempted theft right there. But the thing is, You might look at this, you might think it's nothing. It's emblematic of how emboldened these people actually feel, that they feel they have no consequence for their actions anymore. That they have no consequences whatever for their actions, and they can do whatever they want. And they know that the authorities and people and whatever else will instantly come to their side, right? Because of how indoctrinated we are. Obviously, she has the instant thing where she can easily put on the damsel in distress thing. Even though she won't be doing the damsel in distress thing, it's more like a Medusa thing. But, you know, she can easily play the part if she wanted to. You know, so she felt threatened and all of this stuff, right? Great example I was talking about with Joe Marsh about how these people will try and weaponize the authorities that they hate so much, right? She was the first person to go on about systemic racism in the authorities, all of this stuff, right? She'd go up with all of the lefty talking points. You can just tell. You can just tell. There's many other people out there, ladies and gentlemen, that will feel emboldened on what they can do and will actively use the police and the authorities that they hate so much, the system that they hate so much, against you to have it crack down on you, right? Joe Marsh had a great example of this, somebody that he dealt with one time. I believe this was in I think it was in Cardiff, and he got sent to Wandsworth prison over this. And explaining how somebody was going to attack him, a lady was going to attack him, these anti-fascists, with like this weird weapon that was like two sticks taped together with a flag on it. And he ended up pushing her as a defensive action. She ended up falling down some stairs and getting, I believe, a graze on her face or whatever, having her face busted up a little bit. He got arrested. He then got sent to prison. Nothing ended up happening to her, but she openly says that she is an anarchist and she will use the police that she hates so much to get you arrested because of your differing political opinions, all the while attacking you and instigating it with a weapon. Here's that section of the interview if you haven't gone to see it. Link down below. Go watch the full thing. It's extremely insightful.
Into prison, I went to Wandsworth. I got 6
Yeah,
months.
you briefly mentioned it.
Yeah. Well, we went to London to a protest and we were attacked by Antifa lefties in the subway. And this girl went for me with a stick, right? It was like 2 broom handles taped together with a anarchist flag on it. She came running up the steps towards me with this stick waving at me. So I pushed her down the steps and she smashed her face in on the floor. And I turned around and there was 2 police there, grabbed me, arrested me. But I wasn't bothered. I just said, okay, no problem. Get the CCTV, right? She attacked me with a stick. She admitted attacking me, right? I went to court and I got jailed for 6 months. You know, this is why it's not worth getting into hassle with these lefties. Like, you know, it's just not worth it, because she was saying on Facebook, she's an anarchist. She hates the police, but she'll use the police to get me jailed. You know, and in court, she said, yes, I attacked him. Why did you attack him? Because he's a fascist. And he doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as me, is what she said, right? And I was convicted because I was saying it was self-defense. I took 1 step forward to push her. And because I took that 1 step forward, they said it wasn't self-defense. You know, but like now...
Tell us what you need to know. The weaponization of the court system. Obviously, you'll know, ladies and gentlemen, even so much as pushing somebody, you need to be able to stagger your stance, plant your foot in order to get the force generation from the floor to be able to push somebody, even just to create distance. And you instantly know what it would be if it was either, you know, if the roles were reversed, right? Obviously, you can imagine what it would look like if Big Joe here was to be attacking a woman with a weapon, right? Obviously, you know, optics very, very different. The optics, just the way that it looks, right? And instantly people make their judgments off of that. They want you dead. They want you dead, and this is how emboldened that they feel. This is what the weak, two-tiered, politicized police system has created. It's created a monster whereby Louise thinks that she can just go out and attack people just because they have differing political views or whatever, or try and steal things from them, right? But God forbid you do anything so much as even look at these people the wrong way, or simply push them away from you, and then you end up going to prison for 6 months. And God knows what can happen for you inside some of these prisons, because obviously they'll deliberately send you to a place where you might be made an example of by a lot of the gangs that run the prison from the inside. Now, what do I want to do? I wanted to bring this up, ladies and gentlemen, because in America, you have a lot more freedom to say things like this in ways that really, really matter, in ways that really, really make a difference, right? the attitude, how we are thinking about this needs to change. And that a lot of people now, where grace was previously afforded, they cannot be that grace afforded anymore. At least in my opinion. They cannot be that grace of mind afforded anymore. And I'm being very deliberately careful with what I say, because we're seeing now, even if you advocate for any kind of violent action in self-defense, it will be you that ends up receiving the brunt of the law, right? If you're on the wrong side of the political spectrum, and then you advocate for violence in defense of yourself or your family or your personal property, your being, whatever it may be. If you advocate for violence because people want to do violence for you, to you, and not wanton violence without any cause, right? Lawful defensive violence is exactly what I'm talking about. But now we're seeing that seemingly defensive violence is not lawful anymore. It's not lawful to protect yourself anymore. That's seemingly what we're seeing. But we should at least be thinking in this way when it comes to these people now. Basically what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, is be on your ones. Right, that's basically what I'm saying. Stephen Crowder, in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination, summed this up fairly well, in my opinion. I'm going to play his clip now, where, again, what we should be advocating for, and what I, would be advocating for if we didn't live in the current state that we do, right? If our government actually supported us, right? But this is something you should always be ready to do, even if it might come later on and you end up having to, and you end up being arrested or whatever. I don't want that to happen, obviously. But these are the kinds of people that you're dealing with. And this is, in my opinion, where our mindset needs to be. If you think like me, if you have any political views like I do, not necessarily exactly the same, right? But they think that you're all the same anyway. If you're not on the exact same page as them, if you're not as vehemently behind the cause that they are, if you're not part of Mao's Red Guard or Kia's Red Guard in this country, you are as good as a Nazi, right? So be prepared for that and just understand that this is how they think. And this is how we should be thinking in response. And where grace was afforded before, we should be thinking about not affording that grace anymore.
Ask you a question. I have a couple of words to say here. You've had the weekend. Are you less angry or more angry? Do you feel as though you've gotten the rest you need, or is it the kind of tired that sleep doesn't seem to fix? Because that's where a lot of us are here, I know. And I want to say a couple of things. Last week, some words I think could be taken out of context. And I want to be really, really clear, especially while we're at this boiling point in our country, where people may take some clips and tell you that Stephen Crowder is irresponsible. He advocated violence. That's right. I am. I want to be crystal clear about that. I am advocating for lawful violence defensively that has been abandoned for years, and I want it to replace where grace was afforded before. So I want to be clear, I'm not calling for anyone to go out in the street and commit random acts of violence or even targeted acts of violence. That is not what I am calling for. But I am calling for lawful violence to protect you and your own where you afforded grace to the left before.
To protect and where grace was afforded before. That's the key point.
Than a pat in the back and good shooting as a comment for what he did if all of us had been acting in self-preservation the right way. The McCloskeys, I believe was their name. Remember them in Missouri, protecting their own property with their own guns on their own porch? And they had to go through years of legal battles. That shouldn't be an outlier. It shouldn't be an outlier. It should be the norm. And you're going to see a highlight reel.
Obviously, it's a lot different in this country as well. We have police outright protecting predatory gangs, right? From fathers that want to rescue their daughters from these gangs. We've had instances of that happening. I've covered that on the podcast before. But yeah, you've seen that he's talked about Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse obviously shouldn't be an anomaly, the fact that he used a gun to defend himself. And he took aim at 3 people on the left. And what was it? He found a pedophile, I think it was a domestic abuser, and another type of criminal, drug dealer maybe. I can't remember exactly which it was. He took shot at 3 people. I think it was 2 of them ended up dying. I think it was. All of them were people whom a sane society would have thrown in prison long ago anyway. But it shouldn't be a whole thing. But now you have police in Canada saying, oh, it's just better off to just give the robber, give the home invader whatever he wants. Well, what if he wants a piece of your wife? What if he wants a piece of your girlfriend, right? Or what if he wants a piece of your, what if he wants a piece of your boyfriend? Who knows, right? Never know nowadays. Likely not. Likely not. What if he wants your car and that's your only way to get to work, to provide for your family, or to increasingly go to work, to pay more taxes? Why then? Because you need to go to work to pay more taxes because you have taxes to pay. Therefore, you need to go to work to pay the taxes. Why? Because you have taxes to pay, so you have to go to work to pay taxes. And yet, when somebody breaks into your home or somebody grabs you on the street, like Louise Rowe, you just have to, just take it. And then what happens when you see that the police won't do anything? The police are supposed to be our protectors and servants, right? They won't do anything. They're on the side of the criminals. Who else do we have? Who else do we have? It's getting to that point, ladies and gentlemen, now where it could happen to you. It could happen to you. So just be ready. I'm not saying to anybody go out and search for conflict. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying go out looking for violence. Right? That's what these people do. But you should be prepared, whenever you see these people now, to defend yourself and instill the fear of God into them. So that's ultimately the only thing that they're going to respond to. They're not going to respond to arguments anymore. They're not responding to speech, and they can't anyway. They're not going to be responding to that. Ultimately, like you see, these people now just need to understand the only thing that they're going to understand, the only thing that's going to change behavior, motivate behavior change now, is fear of retribution. I don't necessarily want these people living in fear, right? Because free exchange of ideas has to occur if the best outcome is going to happen. The debate has to occur because that's when you get the best ideas come forward. You have this rhetorical battle and the best ideas will come forward to the audience, to the people watching. That's the outcome. That's the goal, right? But it's become so politicized and so charged, so angry, that now one side doesn't want to talk anymore. They want to fight. But we should be prepared for that. And grace should stop being afforded to these people. We've seen that they not only would kill you and want to hurt you, but they'll spit on your grave, they'll piss on your grave, right? And they will target your family. Now, that's a line pretty much for everybody can cross, right? They will have no problem targeting your family. Like we've seen it. We've seen it with Bailey McLaren and the fact this family still in hiding. Batley school teacher and I believe his family still in hiding. Many families still in hiding or potentially even had to leave the country because of the predominantly Pakistani, racially and religiously motivated gang that our government have sided with. So in the back of your mind, always just bear in mind that we have nobody to rely on but ourselves, really. You have nobody to rely on but yourself. And that's why the previous episode where we talked about silent acts of political protest and making sure that you're the absolute best that you can be is extremely important. So go and watch that video if you haven't done so already. I know I stutter a lot. I know I go around the mulberry bush a couple of times, but it's an important one. And that'll do it for today. Just keep that attitude in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Just keep that attitude in mind. Don't go looking for it. Don't go looking for it. Don't go instigating. It's not what we do. It's not what a good person does. But be prepared to respond. And just by keeping that in your mind, that no one's on your side, you only have yourself to rely on. Could save your life. Have a good night, guys. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you'll be able to see this. If not, I'll just try and upload the base video as it is. And, it's not going to necessarily sound the best or anything like that. But at the end of the day, just got to try and do what we can. Have a good one, guys. Pleasure speaking with you again, as always. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for watching. Hwyl fawr. See you next time. You take care now. Godspeed.